Ita Olszewska from the University of Oslo. She is a guest researcher at the Department of Linguistics and Scandinavian Studies, University of Oslo, Norway. In 2021 to 2025, she worked as a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Multilingualism in Society across the Lifespan Multilingual University of Oslo. She received her PhD in curriculum and instruction with a specialization in English for speakers of other language and bilingual education from the University of Florida in 2020 as a Fulbright scholar from Poland. Her research interests include multilingual education, migration, teacher education, humanizing and arts-based research methods, linguistic justice, and socially just pedagogies. So today she will be presenting a talk entitled Radical Multilingual Spaces of Hope, Counter Stories of Refugee Background Students in Poland. Professor Aleksandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hala. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dzień dobry, dobry wieczór, good morning, godeder middag. I feel so honored to be joining the forum today. I'm grateful for the invitation, and I will share my PowerPoint right away. Okay, can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes, we can see now.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you to Professor Makoni and the organizers for hosting the forum. And thank you to the attendees for dedicating the time to be here with me, us together in this busy time and world, and to learn together. And in a way, it's a privilege and resistance to coloniality, capitalism, development to stop for a minute and engage collectively in a dialogue in a safe online space, and to reflect with oneself, with others, the world, following Paulo Freire's train of thinking about critically reading the word and world. I also want to recognize the knowledges which are silenced or unheard, overlooked, and not considered as knowledges, thus not part of the dialogue. And here you can see, some of the co-narrators of today's talk, entitled Radical Multilingual Spaces of Hope, Counter Stories of Refugee Background Students in Poland. From the left, Karina, Lisa, Susie, and Zoya, 4 students who dreamt of becoming K-pop singers one day in South Korea, but also who fled from Chechnya to Poland. I'm not including the other narrators in the slide, but they are part of the co-telling of this story, including the school principal, the faculty, the staff of the school. And also, I want to here highlight that the pseudonyms that are used for the co-narrators, co-researchers in the slide are pseudonyms selected by participants themselves. And I can also, I saw in the audience Maria Cody, who is still my mentor. She was my advisor at University of Florida, and she also was part of. She joined me after 2 years. I collected my data in 2019 in Poland, and then she came to conduct a study about multilingual leaders in several countries, including Poland. So we've been combining our strengths, forces to do the work together, and we're working on a paper on radical multilingual spaces of hope. And it will, please stay on the lookout for this paper soon. So as we need light and hope, Baldwin's words resonate with me, and I try to let them guide me through life and work. And just to quote Baldwin, it's necessary while in darkness to know that there is light somewhere. One will perish without the light. This way of thinking guided my work, being inspired by my mentors. Hopefully hopeful polyphonic counter-story of one public school in Poland and its students with refugee background, which is part of a larger study my PhD dissertation defended in 2020, is supported by the Fulbright Commission and conducted at University of Florida, as well as in Poland, and continued at University of Oslo at Multiling. So as it's multimodal and multilingual polyphony, not only I want you to see the co-narrators, co-researchers, participants in this talk, but also hear them. And I would like us to listen to Karina reciting her poem entitled I'm From, which we wrote during the fieldwork. She wanted to write and recite it in Polish, even though she also spoke in Russian and Chechen and a little bit of Korean and was learning English. But that's what the language was that she chose. She had an opportunity. She was, of course, free to choose her language or also trans language. So let's listen to the poem. Here.
Skąd jestem? Jestem z telefonu, z telewizora i łóżka. Jestem z czterechpokojowego mieszkania, piękny, przytulny i miły. Jestem z, który fioletowa, ładna. Jestem z modlitwa 5 razy dzień. Żyta i siostr i brata. Jestem z uroza, Ramadan i Nowy Rok. Jestem z nich żyć i nie bij innych. Jestem z islamu. Jestem z czcienia i bumat. Siakczak i pelmeni. Z wielu historii z prezent, który kupiła mi mama, wisiorek i bransoletkę w czarnym pudełeczku. Jestem z tych momentów radość i szczęście.
So Karina, as you can hear, is not only from Chechnya and not only of refugee background, but also of dreaming of becoming a Korean pop singer. And she's all of it and much more. The joy, the sorrow, the dreams, the past. She's from all of these places, people, things, beings, and knowledges that have shaped her and are shaping her throughout this journey. I'm sharing this research with you today, but it took a village, and I want to acknowledge the people who are part of this work. So I included a handprint with my poem created during the fieldwork entitled I'm From, referring to the fact that this polyphonic counterstory and I am in a constant process of becoming, coming from many people, beings, experiences, and knowledges. The participants, school principal, teachers, and staff played a central role in the work and were kind and generous to share their stories. I also recognize that I'm standing on giants' shoulders, as this work would be impossible without the work of those who came before me and that shaped me. This research, as mentioned, was guided and supervised by Maria Cody, and we're currently working on a paper. And I was supervised also by my committee, Buffy Bundy, Paula Gołąbek, Nancy Dana from University of Florida, and was also given external advice by a professor from University of Warsaw. I was mentored by Turil Opsahl from Norway and Anna Defina from Georgetown University. And there were also, of course, other supportive souls behind the scenes, as well as power and privileges at work that allowed me to do this work, but more about this in a second. And I'd like to talk just a little bit about my positionality. Alex, in international context, Ola in Poland, even when in Poland very often people not ask how they want to be called, they just call me Ola. I prefer Alex, so some people agree with that, some of them not. So I was wearing different hats. I'm of immigrant background. I'm a multilingual learner, international student, teacher, educator, researcher, advocate. As a white scholar working in the global north, originally from Europe, Central Eastern Europe, though, maybe global east, but here a question mark, and I would like to ask some questions afterwards about that. But still Europe, working with vulnerable populations, but also with privileges of system literacy that I have. So I recognize the importance of analyzing my own positionalities and how my own background played a role in making sense of this educational space and the participant stories. I come myself from a multi-generational migrant family, the US and Hungary, and myself grew up in the US and Poland, and migration and being on the move was the constant. Having parents on both continents in Europe and the US has also contributed to developing a hybrid multilingual identity, a life in the borderlands, a sense of not belonging anywhere and feeling like an outsider, and also belonging everywhere, feeling like an insider. So as a young, undocumented for some time migrant in the US, emergent bilingual, identified as an English language learner from communist Poland at the time, in the late 80s and early 90s, I grew familiar with some struggles of linguicism, fear of deportation, and other injustices faced by migrants, but my whiteness privilege, light hair, system literacy, and being part of the academia made me safe as an adult in Trump's America when doing my PhD, until my family or I opened our mouth speaking Polish or in a different variety of English than accepted. So in my work, I consider myself in some ways as an insider, as I shared some of the experiences of the participants. I also partially grew up in the district of the school from the study. I am of Polish background. I'm familiar with and experienced public Polish education, and I've worked as a teacher educator and teacher of refugee background students and immigrants in the Polish context. But in many ways, I also perceive myself as an outsider, as I was new to and unfamiliar with the school setting specific dynamics. I was not of Chechen origin, of refugee background. I was an adult and wearing a researcher hat coming from the US, who people in Europe very often mock and admire at the same time. There is this saying that a lot of Poles use, saying American scientists have discovered, and we know that there's a joke here coming. So I recognize that I'm not a neutral researcher, educator, activist, and I continue to learn how to read the word and world, to use Ferry's language, and to examine the meaning and impact of my whiteness privileges and how I'm part of the system, but also looking for ways to dismantle it with hope. So speaking of hope and searching for hope, here's a photo from 2019 from the research site from the school where I was conducting my doctoral fieldwork, representing sun, but also hope in Warsaw, Poland, the hope I sought in a seemingly hopeless place for refugees. So the school I'll be telling you a story about is Good Angels Public Elementary School, located in a low socioeconomic industrial and post-industrial district of the city, with many abandoned and dilapidated buildings. It is situated at the margins of the city, but at the same time close to the city center. So it's a very interesting area, but also there are many misconceptions about this area. It's pejoratively referred to as a shady area of the city. And the school is placed at crossroads, literally bordered by railroad tracks. So in a way, literally and figuratively placed in symbolic borderlands. And it was located by a refugee reception center that is not there anymore. And in 2019-2020, half of the school population consisted of immigrant and refugee background students. But it was not an example of a typical public school, a school in Poland, in Warsaw in 2019-2020. The school is known for and was known for its welcoming approach, prioritizing student safety and well-being over grades, and it was commonly called the Good Angels School. In Polish, it's Szkoła pod Dobrym Aniołem, as the school principal explained that angels are present in all religions and embody good and care. But I would like to zoom out from the micro scale to see a shifting multilingual landscape and several challenges in Poland and around the globe in the context of refugee background students. So globally, we face a persistent increase in forced displacement caused by, generally speaking, exploitive policies and practices implemented by the global North and the global South. Capitalism, imperialism, greed, racism, we know it all. And the population of forcibly displaced people almost doubled since my dissertation. So my dissertation defense was in 2020, and the figure has doubled. And it estimates that there are 123 million displaced people, including 36 million refugees in the world. And these numbers are obviously dynamic and imprecise. And also, it's not unreasonable to think that the number of displaced children will continue to increase. So these figures serve to highlight the scale of the issue, but scholars emphasize that we need to reframe the refugee issue and move away from the excessive use of figures and statistical data, as refugees are humans with names, faces, and stories. And here I'd like to refer to Bauman's book, a Polish sociologist who worked in the UK, and his work Wasted Lives, Modernity and Its Outcasts, and his concept of human waste or wasted humans, as it was something that, and this is something that I reflect upon in the context of refugees, border politics of globalization, economic progress, and dehumanization. The global north as a fortress has caused so much violence across the globe, but trying to keep their fortress clean with the dumpsters at the borders or elsewhere. That's how Bauman frames this idea of human waste. And then engaging in patronizing imperialist and post-colonial activities of border politics, development aid, and other tokenistic activities. And here to quote a Polish NGO working with refugees called Nomada Association, at Europe's southern gates in the waters of the Mediterranean Sea, over 30,000 people have perished, victims of a fortress that disregards human rights and human life. Over the 31 years of the European Union's existence, billions of euros have been invested in isolation and surveillance and building walls and barriers that erode humanity and justice. So zooming back into the context of Central and Eastern Europe as a result of the war in Ukraine, the increase of Ukrainian refugees has transformed the demographic landscape globally and of Poland and Polish schools. And over the first 6 months since the Russian invasion, more than 4.5 million border crossings from Ukraine have been recorded. And Poland had the largest number of Ukrainian refugees, including 200,000 students. But as I said before, these numbers are shifting all the time, and they're dynamic and imprecise. I also want to point out that the context of the study, when we were conducting our research, me in 2019 and then Professor Cody in 2021, looked a little different than now, and it's continuously changing. So it only shows how dynamic the context is, and it continues to evolve. Whereas the Poland-Belarus border, 87 people have lost their lives and hundreds more are considered missing, but I will talk about this in a little while. So the vast number of displacements also have significant effects on schools, as more than half of refugees are children. And here I follow Shapiro and colleagues' terminology and refer to this population by the term refugee background students, which comprises forcibly displaced children and youth engaged in educational practices. Scholars advocate for the use of the expression refugee background instead of refugee, because the latter reflects uniquely one dimension of students' identity. And here, a reminder of, you can see in the slide, of the United Nations Refugee Agency's definition of the term, which also can be problematic for several reasons, but that's what is used to frame a refugee when asylum seekers are applying for status. And I also acknowledge that the term of refugee and refugee background students is a social construct and problematic because here, following Django Paris, this naming can be violent because the state-sanctioned naming of people and places are part of the fabric of the dominant social order, which research often participates in and perpetuates such namings of deficiency and erasure. Also here, I want to talk about the omnipresent dehumanizing and demonizing discourse around refugees in both public and educational settings in Poland, but also around the world, where refugees are seen as the problem And we're probably all familiar with these fear-mongering narratives, so I would rather not perpetuate them here. But as a counter story to this majoritarian narratives that refugees are a problem, as you see on the right-hand side of the slide, there are 4 language self-portraits created by the co-narrators, co-researchers reclaiming their power by choosing how they want to be seen when it comes to, for example, their multilingual identity, and challenging this way representations of refugees, which tend to dehumanize, center the damage, pathologize, portray them as powerless victims, threatening villains, plagues, a burden, or charity case for white saviors. And there's a really powerful letter slash paper of Eve Tuck, who talks about suspending the damage, which was also very inspirational and shaping in thinking about this. And in the Polish context, despite the warm welcome given to Ukrainian refugees, especially the first months after the Russian invasion in February 2022, Poland is and has been one of many countries with an anti-refugee climate shaped by deficit narratives and propaganda. And the attitudes of Poles and the Polish government toward Muslim and non-white refugees have been reported to be, for years, deeply hostile, especially during the European humanitarian crisis in 2015 and on the Polish-Belarusian border until now, where Poland has frequently violated international law by not allowing asylum seekers apply for refugee status and coercing pushbacks on the Belarus border. So to illustrate that, on the left, you can see a photo of a wall built to keep asylum seekers out. And the increased level of xenophobia, racism, and Islamophobia in Poland can be also illustrated by a photo of a sticker that stated, "Stop Islamizing Poland." And it was hung at the top of the main entrance door of the study's participants when I was invited for dinner to their apartment building. And their apartment, and it's this sticker captured in a way the hostile, not even in a way, it just captured the hostile context. So here it's as an example. And on the right side of the slide, you can see photos of Poles warmly welcoming Ukrainians on the Polish-Ukrainian border the first days, weeks after the Russian invasion in February 2022. But again, there are escalating tensions and acts of discrimination toward Ukrainians in Poland as well. So none of these groups are homogeneous, obviously, and certainly it would be harmful to make such simple generalizations with this juxtaposition, but it shows who is welcome and who is not. And such deficit representations are oftentimes internalized and perpetuated by educators who work with refugee background students. And if they're not challenged, it has detrimental effects. So on top of that, Poland had very little expertise in integration practices with migrants and refugees, especially in the context of multilingual education. And refugee studies and research teacher education of Polish as a second language for refugees constitute relatively new fields. There is an increase of scholarship, fortunately, but teachers are not sufficiently trained to teach Polish as a second language, but there are several programs and workshops that are being offered mainly through grants obtained by NGOs, but also in some departments of education or linguistics at some Polish universities. But very often, yes, teachers feel unprepared or underprepared to work with this population. There's also no national curricular document on teaching Polish as a second language yet. So in the view, in light of the above, there are many bottom-top initiatives, but still there's a lot to do in terms of academia and state. In addition, just very briefly, there are double standards about linguistic diversity that still prevail, and only certain multilingual practices are valued, where often monolingual and deficit views get promoted, but there also is a shift, especially like through bottom-top initiatives. And while several rights exist for linguistic diversity, the reality often reflects a disregard for these rights, leaving refugee background students often unsupported. This causes an opportunity gap for students. And despite all these odds, obstacles, ideologies, there are radical spaces of hope that fight, in which educators fight every day for transformative, equitable, and high-quality learning spaces, and honor and leverage students' backgrounds and linguistic practices. So here, I just wanted to mention a special issue that we co-edited with Professor Cody and Professor Yilmaz in the Journal of Multilingual Theories and Practices, where we tried with several scholars to address the gap on the intersection of multilingual policies and practices, education, and refugee background students across the globe. So in summary, we don't have the most hopeful image of Poland in the context of refugee background students, but we have a place of hope, the Angel School. So I would like to get back to the term radical spaces of hope and how we see that. So first, we join critical pedagogues in the belief that schools can be radical sites of possibilities with crucial roles to play for marginalized groups. And in this approach, education and schools are not neutral, rather they're political acts that can be sites of oppression, but also turns of struggle for change. And Ferry, whose work, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is often cited, requires us not only do we need to critically reflect upon and understand the world, but as educators, we need to reimagine it and recreate an alternative space in solidarity with others. And also in the same vein, Bell Hook's work underscores the role of educators in the lives of their students. And in Teaching to Transgress, she writes, "To teach in a manner that respects and cares for the souls of our students is essential if we are to provide the necessary conditions where learning can most deeply and intimately begin." So Hooks also articulates that the margin may be more than a site of deprivation. It's also a site of radical possibilities, of a space of resistance where educators play a key role. And I tried to capture my scholarly guidance. It was one of my qualifying questions during my quals, during my PhD, rooted in Ferry's and other critical scholars' work by a so-called critical scholarship of hope. And on the right, you can see the visual of critical scholarship of hope. And again, using Ferry's language, it could be defined as a critical reflection and action enacted by scholars together with others, filled with hope, seeking to advance social justice through reinvention of power, through teaching and research, with an ultimate goal of liberating people and societies, leading to humanity restoration. And I anchored this framework in first Ubuntu, in South African philosophy, emphasizing our shared humanity, which positions collective well-being above individual success, and could be illustrated by the sentence, "I am because you are." And second, I anchor this scholarship in Ferry's idea that hope needs action to realize its potential. And secondly, when speaking of radical spaces of hope in the context of the study, translanguaging is helpful, as it is an approach to multilingualism that is centered not on languages, as often been the case, but on the practices of multilinguals, and in which all languages, or rather all ways of languaging, are seen as resources. So translanguaging calls for educational equity, as it can be seen as creative and transformative trans spaces of possibilities, and as a key to open up a space of resistance and social justice for minoritized groups. And also, I drew upon refugee critical race theory, coined by Strekalova, Hugs, and colleagues, And this theory is rooted in critical race theory. And refugee crits specifically focus on refugee background students' educational experiences and calls for the use of counter storytelling as a powerful instrument to analyze the operating forces, contest the majority narratives of master stories by centering refugees' perspectives through counter stories defined as stories of self-definition and method of telling the story of those experiences that are not often told, those on the margins of society, and a tool for analyzing and challenging the majoritarian story. And Refugee Crit also urges researchers to look for creative and alternative theoretical and methodological ways of unpacking and making sense of experiences through, for example, art. So at the right, you can see a visual representation of the conceptual framework. And I followed Django Paris' encouragement posted on a platform once called Twitter to choose and create art to represent our conceptual frameworks. And it came to me in a perfect moment as I was having a very hard time finding a way to capture my conceptual framework, chapter 2 of my dissertation. And I was having a hard time using a traditional graph. And it just didn't make sense to me somehow. And following Paris's advice to use art instead of standard graphs, as well as David Lynch's recommendation on daydreaming, and not pushing harder but letting go, and waiting for all the puzzles to come together, it allowed me to visualize this theorization for the study in a little bit different way. And actually, art and letting go helped me make sense of it, organize my theorizing, and connect the dots, and it all came into place. So following the arts-based approach to research through a bricolage of approaches to data collection, I tried to show my deep respect for my co-researchers as we both learn from each other throughout the process. And this aligns with the main pillars of humanizing research, which Paris describes as a methodological stance, which requires that our inquiries involve dialogic consciousness raising and the building of relationships of dignity and care for both researchers and participants. And also, Savage and colleagues asserted, by employing humanizing perspective, researchers can work to unlearn practices of engaging participants at a size of exploitation, avoid the grab and go approach, and instead consider ways to give to learn from participants. And at the same time, the term itself, humanizing, and I've been reflecting upon that, should not be a separate approach. All research connected to humans should be humane and humanized, and this shows how problematic, as we know, research in general is when even in critical fields we use such terms. But in the meantime, we need a term for this approach somehow to grasp these methods that differ from doing research on exploiting the participants, treating them as numbers, and not establishing relationships with them. So in the study, I applied arts-based research methods, not only for the theory, but yeah, for the methods that I applied in the work and the methodology. And they're called, especially in research with marginalized populations, as sometimes so much more can be expressed through art as one single verbal narrative. It cannot capture complex multilingual identities, and art is very often a medium that's served and can serve as a tool of resistance, fight against oppression, and hope. And it can be a personal but also universal language, a tool of agency, healing, and liberation. So the co-editors of the book, edition called Arts-Based Research Across Textual Media and Education, Expanding Visual Epistemology, Jason DeHart and Peaches Hash, along with the chapter authors, explore a variety of arts-based practices and methods across media and education, and advocate for use of multiple methods of analysis and representation that span artistic and scientific epistemologies, ways of knowing and seeing. So on the left, you can see my chapter called Humanizing and Multilingual Arts-Based Research Methods. counter stories in Poland, and it describes in more depth the arts-based research methods that I used. And the use of arts-based research enabled me to co-construct counter stories to the dominant narratives perpetuated about refugees in Poland, and it was an attempt also to portray their fluid and nuanced identities. And also in a study conducted with Professor Cody and Gołąbek, we discussed the power of young adult novels considered as counter stories to restore mainstream narratives that shaped teachers' perspectives of emergent bilinguals in rural Florida. So as far as arts-based research methods in this particular today story, I'm co-narrating today with the participants, and we co-created multilingual identity text, specifically multilingual self-portraits, illustrating participants' spatial-temporal multilingual trajectories combined with interviews. So I would like to share some snippets of the data. For example, in a very short snippet, Zoya captured the past, present, and future as dynamic and fluid, and connected it with languages, places, and her body, that is her feet, by saying, I chose green because I stood on Chechen soil, and red because I'm standing on Polish soil, and Korean because I will go to Korea. Participants connected their future to South Korea. And Lisa said, my goal is to go to South Korea, buy a house, and go to a BTS concert. And I learned from them that BTS is a famous Korean pop band. So that was something new for me. She even wanted to be called Lisa because as her pseudonym in the study, because that was one of her friend's favorite Korean singers' names. So this way they enacted an envisioned multilingual identity, which could be defined as desired relationship with certain groups represented by specific linguistic practices because of what they symbolize. And also in their poems, participants expressed that they were from Korean pop, from BTS, and also in their portraits, participants embodied Korean at their heart. You can see Karina on the right, the very right. And she represented Korean language at heart because she had deep affection for the language and culture of South Korea, and she had studied the Korean language through movies. She also connected her future to Korean language as she wanted to continue to study it and wanted to visit South Korea one day. So Karina also represented this dream in her feet to express her willingness to go to Korea. So she marked the color that was representing Korean. And she also revealed that she attended Korean language classes with a school counselor after school. So the envisioning of a relation with imagined community made individuals embody Koreanness and engage in multilingual online practices through, for example, listening to K-pop, watching Korean drama shows, and learning Korean online. And for instance, Susie shared, I studied Korean. I watched and checked songs. Did I tell you that I studied Korean with my friend? I'm used to subtitles in Korean shows. It's written in Russian and they speak in Korean, and I'm used to it and I love it. And Susie also, she posed for the photo in her favorite position, that is showing the peace sign and delicately bending her knees. And when asked for the rationale behind this, she replied that it was Koreans that's what they did when posing for photos. She also mentioned another popular pose with making a shape of heart with one's hands and fingers, and she shared that she would do that too if we were doing another portrait. So some of these findings, just snippets of the findings, have shown that the participants' multilingual identities are rich, and they're in constant interaction, making, remaking, and languaging was considered as an integral part of their lives, and enabled them to participate in an active co-construction and embodying of their identities, like, for example, the pose or having Korean language drawn in the heart. So we also wrote I Am From poems together, and then combined them with our handprints. And this enabled an exploration of one's belonging and becoming. And a snippet of a story was the poem that you listened to at the very beginning of the talk. And also in the analytical phase, I used humanizing multimodal and multilingual analytic portraits as an analytical tool to honor the participants' realities and experiences. And I was forefronting them at the center of the analysis, because this enabled me to see and hear them and be with them in a way across the coding process, instead of only seeing codes, phrases, and chunks of data. So I wanted to be with them and see them and listen to them when I was listening, for example, to the interviews again, or to their poems recited. And similarly, the school tried to see the students and affirm the students' identities, backgrounds, languages, leverage their resources, celebrated them, listened to them, helped students build on their resources. And here I see that we're running out of time, because it's already 9:45. So I will just briefly skim through some of the photos from the school that I took during my field work. So you can see the multilingual environment. And some of these examples are rather tokenistic, like having hellos or flags of the countries or languages of the students. There was a calendar of 3 cultures representing 3 religions of the students. And then you had some signs, bilingual signs, also from COVID time, about changing shoes or keeping the distance. And then also there were templates for parents to use when they were to write an excuse for their kids not being able to go to school, or some other ways of communicating with the parents. And here you can see brochures that were published by the City Bureau. And here they are in Ukrainian, Polish, and Russian, which was not a typical also thing to do before 2022 in public schools. So I will just run through these, because I would want to get to the summary wrap-up of this talk, but wanted to mention that the students' multilingual realities was something that and I think that this phrase captures it very well, that multilingual is not a superpower, it's normal. So the co-narrators, co-researchers, Karina, Lisa, Susie, and Zoya, they didn't see it as something unusual. It was just a norm to them. So I would like to get back to this sunny, hopeful place. And of course, there were serious tensions as well in the schools, and there were several obstacles. But due to time constraint, I will just not get into the details of that, but wanted to summarize this talk with this quote that I saw in the first year of my PhD program. And I think it was in Dr. De Jong's class, Esther de Jong's class, where this quote really resonated with me. All decisions, no matter how neutral they may seem, have an impact on the lives and experiences of students. So even in this hopeless place, in many ways, there was a sphere of influence for teachers, educators to enact change. And here, just as a summary, I'd like to refer to the democracies that are at risk right now, including the Polish one. And they continue to be at risk. And the fight must continue in different ways. As Freire affirmed that democracy is never a given, we need to constantly pursue it. And I reflect myself on my privileges of being born in a democratic country, thanks to a multi-generational struggle of many people, and how my family and others fought against oppression during World War II, the Soviet regime, the Solidarity movement under the martial law. And thanks to this struggle, multi-generational struggle of many people, I was born in a democratic country. And in this slide, and I was asking my mom for some details yesterday, you can see 3 black and white photographs from August 1st, 1984. The martial law was already over in 1983, and it was the first day of the Warsaw Uprising anniversary. People would protest against hiding the information about the Soviet murders of Polish soldiers in 1940, called the Katyn massacre, and it was hidden from the public. And my mom here on the top is on the front lines in the top photo in a white dress. And also the other picture here on the right of the slide, a color picture shows a Solidarity event in the Netherlands in September 1981, where the Solidarity movement was promoted, as well as Polish movies, posters, and Polish artists affiliated with the Solidarity movement in Western Europe were organizing that supported the Polish Solidarity Trade Union. And just one last story at the end that helps me also reflect. And here you can see my babcia Jadzia, who passed away in 2019. And before she passed away, I asked her to tell me about the World War II, some of her experiences, her first loves. And as a young girl, in the 1940s, early 1940s, she transported food in her apron through the distant farm fields to her wounded brother, who was hiding from the Nazi Germans in a stable, and it put her family's lives at risk. But fear didn't paralyze her, because her actions were guided by love, courage, and hope for her brother. And my grandmother also shared with me that her family was too poor to send her to middle or high school. She was heartbroken, but she kept going. She kept fighting. She became a seamstress despite the times of war. And she was very lucky in light of other stories, of course. So I keep thinking about my grandma, who dreamed of continuing her education after elementary school, and me being her wildest dream, even though also I failed in some of her dreams that she had for me. But she kept hoping and enacting of that hope. So I keep asking myself questions: what can I do with these experiences, knowledges, and privileges, and how I can try to create or help create these radical spaces of hope in solidarity, in educational settings, while learning from history, connecting with our ancestors, and while moving ahead and reimagining and recreating what is not working for a sustainable ecosystem instead of an ecosystem, maybe. So I probably have more questions than answers, as you may have now too. So I will end here, but I would like to end with a song. And here, if we have just one more minute to listen to a song, if that's okay. It's a song by Czesław Niemen. and the title of the song is "Strange is this world," and it is considered as one of the first protest songs and themes in Poland that, on one hand, talks about human cruelty, but also about goodness and hope and inspiring change. And it gives a direct commentary on the societal issues from Poland from that time, from the regime. So if we could just listen to it for a second. Sorry. I will.
Dwa słowa, dosłownie. Dziwny jest ten świat. Muzyka Czesław Niemen, tekst Czesław Niemen, śpiewa Czesław Niemen. Dziwny jest ten świat, gdzie jeszcze wciąż mieści się wiele zła. I dziwne jest to, że od tylu lat człowiekiem gardzi człowiek. Dziwny ten świat, świat ludzkich spraw. Czasem aż wstyd przyznać się, a jednak często jest, że ktoś słowem złym zabija tak jak nożem. Lecz ludzi dobrej woli jest więcej i mocno wierzę w to, że ten świat nie zginie nigdy dzięki nim. Nie! 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 Nadszedł już czas, najwyższy czas, nienawiść zniszczyć w sobie.
Okay, I'll stop here. And here are some of the references. Like to thank you for listening and being here today, attending today. And I have some questions, maybe for later, but I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aleksandra, for this powerful talk. Let's say like a humanizing talk, and as the image of the sun that you showed us like reminds us that hope can be found and can be created as well, especially in contexts that are perceived as hopeless. And we all need light and hope. And I think you gave a space of hope, or you through your project, your wonderful project that gave like some spaces of hope for students' background or refugee background students. So thank you so much for this wonderful talk. And now I'll turn it over to Professor Makoni to engage with you in a conversation. Professor Makoni, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much for this. My voice is not very clear, but I hope you can hear me. One of the key arguments that you were making was that we need to think and change the meta language that we are using between talking of refugees, and you were arguing that we might be able to intellectually gain more by talking about people of refugee background. Right. If that argument is valid, my question is, what do individuals of a refugee background in Poland, how do they like to refer to themselves?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so that's actually another study that I'm working on, also coming from the data from my dissertation about how the participants, Karina, Lisa, Susie, and Zoya, would like to be called. And an interesting, so maybe I'll start with the meso level of the school. So, the principal, school principal, she tried to replace the word refugee by the word friend. And there was, I can show you in the presentation, there was one photo here that showed, and here I was skimming through, but here, so there's a poster in the school hallway with the word friend and different poems about friend. So the principal and the leadership and the teachers didn't want to use the term refugee because it had negative, pejorative connotations. And some of the Polish students would use it as a term to offend someone, like, oh, you refugee, even though the person would not be a refugee, but it became a word of offending someone, the uchodźco. In Polish. So the strategy of the principal and the leadership was to change that term into friend. And they would also celebrate the Friends Day, also for Refugee Day. And the students had very different ways of perceiving the word refugee, because two of them, they didn't, they said, yeah, I know this word, but I don't really know what it means. And then the others were, oh, this is a very positive term because we go to this cultural center and we get support and help and people are nice for us there. So they had positive connotations with it. So it showed also how complex the term is and how many different definitions depending on who you were discussing this term with. And there's also another term in Polish that I am also discussing in this paper, cudzoziemca. So cudzy is like belongs to someone, to somebody else. And we had a conversation with the school principal as well about that. And she said that it is a very hostile term, that this person belongs to somebody else, foreign in a negative sense. So she also didn't want to use that term cudzoziemca, even though it's it has been a very common term for many years in the Polish context. Now I see in official documents they are using the term with the experience of migration or with the experience of being a refugee. So yeah. I don't know if
yeah, sorry, I think it does address my question, but what I want to do now is to push the argument and the discussions one step further.
Yeah.
The other argument you are making is that simply relying on numbers, that there are 700 refugees here, 800 refugees there, might not be a very adequate way of dealing with the problem we are faced with. Now, my question is, sociologically, can you build for me a model which you can use to capture the nature of these refugee relationships, which is not grounded on simply numbers? Do you see where I'm trying to go? It's like this. Let's assume that we have been banned from saying there are 10 refugees. And then somebody says, think about other ways of imagining issues about refugees, refugee background. What is, sociologically, what is the model that you could come up with? You begin to talk about it, but I'm trying to sort of see whether I heard you correctly.
Yes. Thank you for this question. And I've been also reflecting upon this because on one hand, the refugee term legally can save life. And depending on being granted the status of refugee, you may survive or not. You may get the resources and assistance that you need. You are illegal in quotation marks because we're all legal, but you have access to being somewhere, to having a place where you're safe and so on. And I have also something that I wanted to share, a quote, if I have it still in my slides. Not here. Okay, I will get to that later, sorry. But on one hand, it's very important to have these this legal term as valid. On the other hand, if you just I want to add that the power of story is so prominent in this, that the way that you tell this story, like for example, how damaged you were, then you may be granted the refugee status. So in this sense, the power of story has real, I mean, it always has real consequences, but it's very often a matter of life or death or survival, and how powerful the story is. That's, yeah, it's a kind of the way how you you can get the status. On the other hand, it's still a label. And then with the issue of numbers, I'm thinking that maybe it's also not an issue of either or, it's more and having it complementary, that we need the numbers, we need the legality in order to be able to use some terms to talk about this issue, because without having the terms, we cannot talk about it and for example, grant the rights. On the other hand, being critical about it. I don't know if I'm answering your question or just like musing about it.
Yeah, I think you are. I think what it means, I can hear Cecile say, but what the meaning a refugee carries as a term depends on the context you are in. Let me give you a good example. In another century, when I was in the UK after high school, coming from what was Rhodesia then, we preferred to be called refugees because it gave us some protection.
Yeah.
But when we eventually got to West Africa, when I got to Ghana, we resisted the idea of being called refugees because it socially excluded us. So in a sense, what I'm trying to get at is the multifaceted nature of whether this term is beneficial to you or not depends on the dynamics and the context that you were in. In a racist UK, it was a useful term because we said, oh gosh, that protected us from, and that enabled us to get particular resources. But when we got into Accra, we didn't want that particular label because that made it was, to some extent, it was unnecessary because we were not considered as such. Right.
Yes. Yeah, so definitely what you're saying underlines the multi-layerness of this term, and also the contextuality of this term, and how you can position yourself as a refugee. And here I wanted to just show you and share a quote from the book The Displaced. I don't know if you can see it. This author, Viet Thanh Nguyen, he a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, also The Sympathizer, and he is a refugee background, and that's what he shared in the book. I was once a refugee, although no one would mistake me for being a refugee now. Because of this, I insist on being called a refugee, since the temptation to pretend that I'm not a refugee is strong. it would be so much easier to call myself an immigrant, to pass myself off as belonging to a category of migratory humanity that is less controversial, less demanding, and less threatening than the refugee. And on a macro level, and that's not only the Polish context, but the global context of all these narratives related to refugees who are a threat, a plague, a group of people that want to exploit the hosting community. And there's so many different damage and narratives around refugees. So just wanted to share this quote that I found also powerful, how complex this term is.
Okay, let me just make the last suggestion, and then I can hand over to my colleagues. Implicit in your presentation, which was excellent, was the idea of whiteness and refugees. Now, my question is this. Since how whiteness is experienced in Florida may be different from how whiteness is experienced in Poland or in the UK, etc. When you combine then whiteness and refugees, you surely have a very semantically explosive relationship that emerges there, right? Because how you experience whiteness in the UK may be very, very different from how you experience whiteness in Poland or there. So I'm sort of, or even in North Korea. So I'm interested in the story that you would tell that combines the idea of a refugee and the idea of whiteness. Let's leave blackness for the time being. Just as a way of thinking about this.
Yes, so in terms of the whiteness that and me
Yes.
of migrant background and
Yes.
undocumented in the
Yes.
late 80s
Yes.
and beginning of the 90s. Yes, so on one hand, white and would be invisible, so would be privileged in
Yes.
terms of the US system, right? But in Poland and Europe, or I would say rather Poland, and that's something that I also would like to get to about global north-south, but also global east.
Yes. Yes.
And being on one hand privileged as a white European, on the other hand, and not being part also of the historic context of the US, and not, of course, as a kid, not realizing that, but until we wouldn't open our mouths, or then we would be identified as someone different.
Yes.
And in the context of Florida, I can tell you a story that I got scared, and that's when I realized how much privilege I have. I went to a dollar store in Florida, in Gainesville, with my husband, and there was a white guy in maybe his 40s, 50s, and then there was a Latinx family speaking Spanish. I was speaking Polish to my husband, and this man was looking at us and at this Latinx family, and then I heard English only, English only, English only, and we knew that, like, we didn't know what's going to happen, and we stopped speaking Polish, and we left the store. In the Norwegian context, also Poles and the Polish diaspora, who is the largest in the Norwegian context, so they don't get racialized, they are still privileged, but there is discrimination around the names, because Poles are seen as cheap labor, as immigrants from the from Central Eastern Europe or Eastern Europe. And also there's this this thing about, first, the association through your last name, through being a certain class. We would say that there are no classes in Poland or Europe. Yes, there are. And suddenly the prices of the buildings would decrease if a Polish family moved in. So there was this idea of, yes, you're white and privileged at the same time. Since you come from Eastern Europe, there is a shade of what there are shades of whiteness. So that's something
Yeah.
we were discussing. Yeah. Yeah, there's also different positionality here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I
Okay.
answered your
No,
question.
you did. Let me stop and I hand over to Hala and she will talk to my other friends. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Makoni and Dr. Aleksandra, for this engaging conversation. We actually have many appreciative and very positive comments about your presentation in the chat box. And we have also some questions, but before I start reading the questions, I would like to start with the verbal questions first. So, Professor Sally Kuku, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is quite thought-provoking. First of all, I'll start with your last comment, that global East versus global West. I think there's a perversion of the distinction between global North and global South. What you are talking about is a matter of soft versus hard boundaries in sociology. Soft boundaries, as you explain it, you don't open your mouth. There is no reason why people would discriminate against you. Hard boundaries, you don't have that option. So otherwise, we're going to talk about global North, global South in Europe, because Southern Europeans were also discriminated against and so forth. So I don't think that's the way to go. I want to go back to what Makoni started his comments with, that the term refugee in many ways doesn't have the negative connotations that you highlighted in the context of use. I'll give you some examples. When I grew up in the Democratic Republic in the Congo, we had just become independent and people discovered that politicians were not trustworthy. The term politician became an insult when used vocatively. So I can tell the person, politician, meaning I don't trust you, you are just a liar. Or worse of all, if the person is a politician and I tell them, you politician, it becomes an insult. Otherwise, the term is still useful. And I remember another case when I started working in Jamaica in 1980. I upset one of our secretaries, and she turned to me and insulted me as African. The best insult she could come up with. In that case, that particular use was negative. But otherwise, we don't have to trash the term African because this person insulted me that way. So I think you put your finger on something that is very, very good that we should know, but you have to contextualize the context in which refugee becomes an offensive term, but not say we don't need a term refugee, because as Makoni showed, if you don't have an alternative term, what do you do?
Right.
After all, every word can be used an insult. Somebody can tell me, you short guy. You know, it becomes an insult too.
Yeah.
Then I have an issue with one of the slides. Refugee is not a problem. Wait a minute. From the point of view of humanity, refugee is a problem because there are injustices, there is violence that produce refugees. So this is, again, one of those things that must be contextualized. We shouldn't forget that there is a problem with forced migrations where people take risks in relocating and so forth. That is a problem. But if you are in the host country, And in your politics, people are blaming everything on refugees, then your slogan becomes very meaningful. These are things that really need to be contextualized. You have a point there, but in the way that you present it, it's like, wait a minute, we shouldn't forget the root problem why there are refugees around the world. So
yes. Thank you so much for these comments. Absolutely. Maybe I'll start from the end. And totally agree. And as I've mentioned, the forced displacement is the problem. And here referring also to what Bauman was talking about in terms of how the global north through their activities create, and he used the term the human waste, which I don't want to use, but he made a point here that that's in a way the north, the global north is keeping their area safe and clean, and they don't want to deal with all the exploitive policies and the consequences of the exploitive policies and practices, the consequences of colonialism, and so on and so forth. So yes, absolutely, refugee. The existence of refugees is a problem. In this context, maybe I should specify more in that slide that here it referred to the fact that the term refugee, which is very often used in narratives as I mentioned before, that refugees are associated with plagues, with like in the context of Poland, in the newspapers, we would have these narratives of them bringing diseases or exploiting our social welfare and so on. So, and then this term would have a very negative connotation in the Polish context. And even then, kids would internalize it as a negative term, some kids. And of course, it should be complexified because not all of these kids are exposed to these narratives. So yes, it's more complex than that. In my presentation, in terms of the global north and south and global east, it was a question that I posed. And thank you for your comment, because then we could go into micro levels of, like you said, Europe, North, South, and so on. But at the same time, again, the context matters. So here's just like, okay, how to go about it coming from Central Eastern Europe and not having the same experiences as Western Europeans, but it's a bigger narrative, the global North and global South. So thank you for this comment. I'll keep thinking more, and maybe there. I don't know if.
Yeah, we still have some questions. So of course, the context matter, as you just mentioned. And thank you, Dr. Sally Coco, for these questions. So we have also Cecile raising her hand.
Yep.
Cecile, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your talk. And I apologize because I need to leave in 10 minutes. I've got another commitment. So I just wanted to make a comment and ask a question. So the comment about Korea and South Korea is actually not, it doesn't pertain to refugees. It's a big trend in Europe. It's a generational thing that now in Europe, even if you are not from a refugee background, your aspirations are towards South Korea. And I was wondering what, if you, in your interviews, if you try to pursue, the question regarding Korea, what is imagined, what is imagined in Korea, what does it encapsulate? No, that's not point I wanted to make. I wanted to make a point on hope. And this is a notion that we've been discussing a lot in the forum, and I've already expressed how uncomfortable I am with this notion and how it could be understood in various, and actually it's a very contentious notion, and nobody really agrees about, the definition of hope. But I wanted to throw something about, because you seem to imply that hope actually is conducive of changes, is conducive of action. I was wondering, and I'm very much in line with the philosopher Zizek, actually, who argues otherwise. He says hopelessness, actually. We shouldn't focus on hope. We should focus on hopelessness, because hopelessness it's what drives actually political action, and it can drive actually a real revolution. It's not hope, because hope, and his argument is say hopelessness is important to address, because you can start change without envisioning how it's going to happen. Whereas with hope, there is a kind of there is this kind of idea that you actually anticipate, or the way forward. Okay. And so, and I don't just throw that just for you, but to my colleagues, and I think because we lots of speakers I talk about hope, and I would love us to actually reflect on hopelessness, and that's what we see in many parts of the world. And when you see how people who are hopeless because they have no way of eating, feeding their family, etc., they have to develop creative actions to actually make a living. And we know that most revolutions actually occurred when there was no hope, when there was no way of going forward, where there was no future that could be envisioned. So yeah, I just think that we should look at hopelessness rather than hope. Or if we do look at hope as you do, I think it shouldn't be self-explanatory. It should be defined. How do you understand hope? How do you understand hope in the ways in which it orients social agents' action, which I didn't see in your talk. So I hear about hope, but I didn't see actually how you mobilize theoretically this notion to engage in actually making us understand the ways in which the population you work with actually envision themselves concretely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these comments and questions, and raising these important issues related to hope. I was building upon the concept of hope in the Freudian sense. Here he actually says the opposite, that hopelessness paralyzes us. And if we get into this apathetic state of not being able to find ways even of thinking or imagining of a way of getting out of this situation, then from a psychological point of view, you may get into states where you just stop fighting, you don't keep fighting, and you don't want to continue and pursue. So there is this concept of also radical hope of philosopher and psychoanalyst Jonathan Lear from University of Chicago, and he talks about hope, radical hope, as when you don't know how it's going to happen, but you keep fighting. So there is this, you can't imagine what's going to happen, and if it's going to get better, but you still keep fighting. Here I'm thinking also in terms of having some sort of faith that very often for lots of people is the driving force. But here I also don't want to, I'm just right now thinking out loud. And I'm not.
But I wonder, yeah, sorry, excuse me.
No,
I
no,
didn't
no.
want to interrupt.
There's this moment that my mom shared from, like a political event, and when there was the communist regime, Soviet regime in Poland, and even though my family is not Catholic, the Pope came to Poland. He was also, in many ways, of course, controversial, but so I don't know even if I should maybe talk about this event, but he came to Poland and he inspired lots of Poles in a very important square in Poland, where he said, look at how many you are. And there were like thousands, millions of people in the square of Solidarity members. And they felt, because they felt that they can maybe win this fight because there were so many of them. But there were times that before the Pope came in, I'm just referring to this one event that my mom was sharing with me, that there was some sort of a feeling of when you feel that spring is coming and that there may be something done. So that was this, I don't know, little ray of hope. But I'm very curious to hear about what others think. And this is I don't know, something that I will be reflecting upon and maybe explore, I don't know, how hopelessness is described as well and theorized.
Yeah, no, there is a lot. Yeah, there is a lot of work in anthropology on that. But you know, when you talk about the psychological aspect, you know, we also need to be clear about the unit of analysis that we take into account. And it seems to me that the key difference between the two of us, I mean, in the ways in which we think of hope or hopelessness, I think more in terms of collectivity, and you seem to think more in terms of the individual, which is another point of departure, because you talk about the psychology, etc. So I don't know. And when I look at historical events, many drastic political changes occurred when people couldn't see any other way of going forward, you know, and they had nothing to lose anymore. Therefore, they engage in
surrender.
Yeah, they engage in. No, I'm just throwing that on the table just to keep us thinking, and see how we can deal with
Maybe
that.
Sorry for interrupting. I'm thinking right now, maybe it could be seen as on a spectrum. I don't know. Right now also like macro level, micro, meso, and or in a system, and not just like either or, but maybe it's.
Yeah. Yeah. Does anybody have a thought on hope and hopelessness? Desmond, I'm sure you have. No, Desmond is okay.
So
we actually have
in a very quiet place, so soaking everything in. Hopefully, I can get to a quieter place and say one or two things.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Sorry for interrupting you, but we are running out of time. So we have a couple of questions in the chat box. I would also like to read. So Magda Madani is congratulating you, Dr. Aleksandra, for this fantastic presentation. And she has a question. So she's saying being a person with a refugee background changes the history of that person and their offsprings. In the action plan of integration and inclusion in Europe, there is a clear division between European Union citizen and European Union citizen with refugee background. So based on that, she's asking, what are your thoughts on the worldview that assumes a refugee background as part of who you are and who your children will be?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this question, comment, Magda. It's good to see you too. Yes, it's. I'm thinking about it in terms of how, on one hand, a legal status should or can impact and shape who you are, what your experiences are in the world, because this legal term can shape these experiences. On the other hand, you may not be a refugee forever. It can be a temporary status. So it's also, it's a very dynamic construct. But also, what are the associations of the meaning in the given context of the place that you're living? And there's also the term of as asylum seekers, so those who are waiting, sometimes for years in the waiting room. And is that also part of, becomes part of their identity, but they're real consequences in terms of the lived experiences of these populations who get to be called refugees, asylum seekers. And I think also there needs to be agency. I mean, not needs to be, but there is an agentic part in all of it, whether you see yourself as a refugee. If that term, like these two girls, I mean, they were 12, 13, 14. They didn't really know what that is. Similar, it was similar to my experiences, where I didn't know that I was an undocumented student in the US. So it didn't affect me in terms of what I was thinking about myself. But probably if somebody started to exclude me based on this categorization, the lived experience could be different. And since I'm white, I have this privilege not to be, for example, associated in most of the context with this term. So it's an important question, and just shows, all these questions show how complex and complicated and nuanced this term is, and has so many layers depending on the context.
Right.
Yeah.
So
thank you, Alex.
Thanks,
I know we are running out of time, but we can discuss it in some other place and time.
Yeah. Hello to Oslo. I can see you're in your office.
Yes, and Jason is here with me.
thank you, Magda, for your question. Hi, Jason. So Ian has also a question about joy. So he is asking, in your approach to radical spaces of hope and your experiences as a historian researcher, how has joy played or even not played a role? We actually have like a clarification from Magda as well. So she's saying she has seen the poem in which the participant says, "I'm from the moment of joy," illustrated in the poem that you just explained.
And I'm just looking at the question that you read about joy, where I can see it in the chat box.
It is the first question that we have.
Okay. I can find it here for some reason. So the term joy, in terms of the whole process of the data collection, and before the data collection, getting to know the co-narrators, co-researchers, the participants, Karina, Lisa, Susie, and Zoya, we established a relationship where we would have fun chats. We would listen to Korean pop that I was learning from them about. And as it was mentioned before, Korean pop is not only associated with refugee background students, it was just a big trend which showed how they just want to enjoy life and they don't want to be associated with like the damage-centered narrative of being the refugees with all the horrendous and traumatic experiences. But they were also young girls who wanted to have fun, who had plans, who had dreams, and had, like, they would share with me some of their crushes at school, and we would laugh about it. So there were, and they also had fun memories of spending time with their friends and their family. So joy was it was very present in our conversations throughout the process of creating the poems and the language portraits. So yeah, we would be very goofy about it, and yes, and the concept of joy, of dreaming, of being passionate about things and experiences. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I think it was like a counter story also to the damage-centered narratives that are also very present in the public discourse and also in research. And for example, in the narratives that are perpetuated by NGOs, very often, because of the power of the story that you need to tell to those who are granting refugee status. So you need to tell all the traumatic stories, share them in order to be granted the status.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Aleksandra, for your response. But I think we are running out of time now. So we can move to the final part of our session, which is unrecorded and moderated. So the informal session of the informal part of this session. We called it after party. So you are welcome to stay and continue the discussion, continue the conversation. So thank you so much for this wonderful presentation and for your humanizing project. And now we can move to the final part. Is there anyone has